Hello, dear ones. Welcome to another conversation on the different shades and shapes of love. The kind of conversation I think we must have more of. As always, before we start, can I invite you to take a moment of centering and breathing with me? Sit down with your back up, drop your shoulders, relax, close your eyes, breathe. Inhale deeply, exhale slowly. Inhale deeply, exhale slowly. Inhale deeply, exhale slowly. When you're ready, gently open your eyes. Now listen with your heart. Today we shall read two shades of love which are connected to each other. Extricate and Destruct. Extricate was that sliver of love I gave myself when I confronted Scott one night about the call I had with the Filipina he met at a bar in the now defunct Paramount Hotel. His convoluted lies angered me, and I pretended to give him a standing ovation for an Oscar-worthy performance. Incensed, he lifted his arm. I had no idea where that arm might land that night, but I stood tall, pointed to his arm, stared him in his eyes, and retorted, "Don't you dare." Straight to the study I went after that, locking the door behind me and recoiling into a corner, trembling for the rest of the night. Sometime later, I woke up on the floor, still in a fetal position. I walked to the bedroom and saw him sound asleep. How could this man whom I loved so deeply and who used to worship me like a goddess be so malevolent? I walked to the beach and wept the sea and winds for what seemed like forever. I knew then that this love had to come to an end. He did not put up any resistance to our separation. The date was fixed for me to move out, and I planned only to take my clothes, even though I had financed the apartment and the furnishings. I was sure I didn't need anything else except to save myself. Ba and Wei came to help me with the move the next morning. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I walked out of our apartment that day. I didn't look back. I couldn't remember if the tears were from relief or loss, or both. Destruct was the cold and hollow love I was hit with when Scott initiated an unexpected legal offensive of 6 lawsuits against my company with preposterous claims, one after another. The divorce papers issued by my lawyers unleashed such a pathological wrath from him. I remember being served some of those wreaths on special occasions like my birthday and Christmas Eve. Was it a tragic coincidence or a vicious intent? There was no more space for new cracks to be had in my tattered heart. Each old crack had to assume a fresh hit of pain instead, and then some more each time. New scoops about his past in the US surfaced in the background search done by my divorce lawyer. Despite the impending divorce, the exigency to fend for the company and the team denied me the indulgence of wallowing in the deep agony of having slept with the enemy. Every day of those 18 months drained me at every level: cash, health, spirit. The business suffered, liquidity dwindled, and creditors demanded. Between natural attrition from a dipping morale and placing the last few loyal teammates out with kind friends and associates, it remains my proudest recollection of my darkest hour that there was no human damage in my own battle of Helm's Deep, when knowledge director, my only immaculate conception, was sacrificed. The only real damage was me. Extricating from love was not just a frightening decision, but also a deeply lonely experience. So the world's loneliest plant, the wood cycad, was a natural choice to pair this shade of extricate with. Cycads are a very old order of trees. They've been on the planet for roughly 280 million years, but this one named after John Medley Wood is special, in a bite your lip kind of way. Richard Forte, one of the world's great biologists, calls it surely the most solitary organism in the world. It may be the last surviving wild example of an ancient species of itself, of the cycad, which stretches back in an unbroken line to the age of the dinosaurs. Now it's all by itself, growing older, alone, and fated to have no successors, wrote Forte. Nobody knows how long it will live. That was how I felt too at the time. The emotional destruction, which I did not expect after that, came with the legal suits, called up the giant kapok tree, which caused a great deal of devastation when one of its major limbs came crashing down one morning to pair with the shade on destruct. This devastation permanently changed the landscape, but also let in bright sunlight and openness where the tree once stood. Felt similar to how it was for me then. And it was a no-brainer who I must have a conversation with on this shit of love, on divorces and the attendant emotional struggles. Had to be my lawyer turned dear friend who saw me through that devastating period of my life, Carrie Gill. When I met Carrie about 14, 15 years ago now, she was the youngest lawyer to be made partner at that time in her firm before the age of 30. She didn't just act for me as my divorce lawyer, but also took on all the litigation matters when the ex-husband sued my company knowledge director. She also went through her own divorce as a mother of 2 young children about a year later. We used to hang out at bars and clubs after ploughing through volumes of affidavits. Carrie is currently a partner with the Family and Divorce Practice Group at Harry Elias Partnership. Hello, Carrie.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for bravely saying yes to being part of this podcast experiment to discuss love and for us to call in love more, right? As we discuss the pressing issues of our time. I just thought maybe for the listeners out there who may not know the context, just share a little bit of how those lawsuits come about. So I founded this educational technology firm called Knowledge Director back in 2002. And the software, right, the education technology software learning director was a success and attracted the attention of Microsoft, remember? And
yes.
we were even in a discussion for an IPO. I met my ex-husband through a work contact, got married, and through this time, we also, as a company, engaged him on a few projects. Then I found out he was cheating on me, broke my heart into a million pieces, spent a year hiding this from friends and family. Because up to that point, my life was almost perfect. When we finally served him the divorce papers, the unraveling was really brutal. Don't know whether you remember this, Carrie, but we were fighting 7 suits, right? A combination of 6 suits with subcourts and high courts for the company matters, and then 1 divorce.
I don't remember the exact number, but I remember that it was more than 5. That was, yeah. I remember I was getting very irritated.
Can you imagine how I felt? The legal onslaught was just so overwhelming, right? Because it came one after the other too, right? I remember using the term Scud missile, actually.
Yeah.
To describe what was going on. It was like, we thought we had to deal with this, and then another came. So in some ways, yeah, it really felt like an onslaught,
I think it's offensive. I remember at that time also I told you, it's because he knows your personality. He knew that this would be the best way to devastate you. So that's why he did it one after the other. And at certain points of time when you were supposed to be at your happiest or happier moments, that's when he would file certain applications against you. I remember that.
Yeah, I know. And I remember you saying that too, that this is the way to sort of break me,
yes.
right? And I remember even the files were so massive that I even had to number them, right? They were like, there was a number, and when your office call or when you call, it was just pulling out that file, it just felt so weighty. And that whole emotional drain that I felt was so emotionally excruciating.
I can understand that. I think that's quite normal actually, because every single time I call, it's like everything comes back into your mind again. It's all over again. What's happening now? I think a lot of my clients have always told me whenever they get an email or a call from me, immediately their hackles go up. They're like, oh God, what's happened now?
It's
what's
true.
the situation? What has he done now? What's going to happen now?
Something new is coming, right?
Exactly.
And I think for me, because of this, like one after another of like almost an offensive, that your heart just, stop beating a beat, and then you're just like, oh dear, you know, what thing have I missed? What's new?
Correct. I mean, he clearly was out to destroy you, but I mean, kudos to you that you kept yourself strong, you kept yourself firm and tall. I think I was quite impressed with how you handled all of that, because I mean, over the years, you've seen other clients who would completely break and just give up. But you never did.
I didn't, but I do remember how emotionally I felt so fragile, all the time. But that's why I thought it was really strange how, despite, all that I remember about how broken I was emotionally, but I still was very clear-minded. You know, when we're going through that whole, very clear-minded with the legal mess. Like it felt like a mess, and I remember joking with you about how this was my payback, right, for deciding to not pursue law in university and went for business instead. So yeah, and I think a big part of that really was also the fact that you were not just my lawyer, right? You were also a friend.
Correct. Well, I would like to take some credit for the fact that you were clear-minded during that time. I was steering you correctly. That's I would like to say.
No, you can't claim that. You must claim that. Because I am surprised. I am surprised that we went through all of that, because I remember how I was feeling.
Yeah.
The heart. And so this is something that, I think people who have gone through divorces will understand that as much as there's a need to be clear-minded, you kind of a Jekyll and Hyde almost, right? I mean, inside you are so broken, but then, on the outside, there's still so much still to have to take care of.
Correct. So it's like what I always tell is pretty much you have to divorce yourself from the proceedings as well. You've got to
pun intended.
Look at it as a piece of work, like a project you got to do, right? And I've got to address this, I've got to deal with this, I've got to deal with this, and try to keep the emotion out of it. It's a very, very hard process to do. Very difficult to do, but that's why having a lawyer that you can talk to your emotions through, that's important. And I think that helped. Sometimes throughout a divorce process, you lose your friends, you lose your family. You can't even talk to them because it's embarrassing, it's humiliating. The shame.
And it's also draining.
Yeah. And the shame of admitting that, either you've made a mistake or something.
Well, generally it's a failure.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
The sense of being a failure, whether it's your fault or not, right, definitely was there, right, in a big way. And I actually remember, not when I was actually considering even walking out of the marriage, one of the thoughts I had, which was really strange, like given that was already in the 21st century, and I was still thinking, oh, but do I want to be known as a divorcee? That even crossed my mind. So I cannot imagine how it would not be one that, most, because I was so independent and I was financially independent. I had a really, thankfully quite a successful professional career. But even then, I was even considering whether that's
regardless of your levels of education, of your money,
your status, or
the truth
achievements.
Is, when it comes to women, until today, even in 2021, women still feel the same way. They don't want to do this, right? They're ashamed of what people are going to say about them. And
the
unfortunately,
stigma,
right? The society we live in has not moved forward enough where there is no stigma. There still is a stigma, unfortunately. That is the reality of the situation.
Yeah, I agree. I think there still is. And can you imagine if we still have stigma about divorces in this time, then the other stigmas would just have to take a number, right?
Yeah, exactly. But the interesting thing is, and this is not man bashing, but men don't have that stigma. If you're a divorcee with children, as a man, nobody's going to say anything about you. But if you're a woman, a single parent with kids, a divorcee, you get that stigma. People look at you differently, which is sad.
We must come back and discuss it. But given that after I met you, and a year later or so, right, you were going through your own divorce. What was that like for you?
Well, okay.
And as a young woman, like
with
you said,
2 kids, I had two kids at that time. They were 6 and 3. Honestly, nowhere as close as to yours, obviously. But it was, I think any divorce is always a very difficult process. Mine was difficult because in the beginning, my ex-husband did not want a divorce, right? So it was that process of getting there. It was a painful process. A lot of things are said, a lot of hurtful things are said between the parties and all that. And, the children hear these things. So it was a very, very difficult process for me. But we ended up settling the matter, and we resolved it. Everything was resolved within a year, right? So in that sense, it was a lot neater than yours. But
yes, I remember
it doesn't
that.
change the fact that for those, I think about 9 months, it was the most horrendous experience of my life.
Yeah.
And that's why I can always understand and empathize with people who are going through divorce now. Because even though mine wasn't as convoluted or as complicated as others, that pain that you go through, that difficulty, the admitting that you have failed, that you made a mistake, the shame of it, it's something that every woman carries, I think.
Especially if you are going through a divorce as a mother with young children.
Yeah, you always got to wonder what your children are going to say to you.
I'm sure. I mean, given that you've really stuck to this area of practice as a lawyer, right? So you must have seen like so many divorces. Have you seen any happy divorces? Meaning that people who are going through a divorce actually being okay through the divorce. I mean, like I always say, I'm a happy divorcee, but during the process, it was definitely far from being happy, right?
Yes.
And you just talk about your own horrendous experience. Have you seen
Well,
any?
I think, happiness is a strong word.
Yeah.
I have seen people go through it in a very amicable fashion.
Okay.
Like, no fighting, none of that, talking to each other civilly.
Okay.
I don't consider that happy, right? I have had 1 or 2 cases where both the parties were genuinely happy for each other to be moving on and for themselves. And I think those relationships were different. They started off as friends, they remained friends throughout the marriage, and they ended as friends as well. Few and far between, chances of it happening are really, really remote. But I would say 99.9% of the cases are not happy divorces.
Yeah.
Because the process is difficult.
It is difficult, right? Because it's almost as if you need to find fault in the other in the process to prove that you have grounds to stand on.
Yes, if you want to get a divorce pretty much immediately after your 3 years period of being married, then you would need to rely on unreasonable behavior, adultery, or desertion. If you want to rely on the less acrimonious fields, then that's
unreasonable.
Separation, right? But you got to be separated for 3 years or 4 years.
Right.
So it's a long process to wait out. So if
and there is an emotional drain there, right?
Yes,
when you
correct.
actually wait out.
Exactly. And the difficulty of then moving on with your life as well.
So, I wonder then, how do you look after yourself given that, you have to be, I mean, I'm sure you are gently irreverent, but really, how do you look after yourself given that, what you do has so much emotions wrapped around it all the time? And would you see that, what's the percentage that you have in terms of clients, both between female and male?
Yeah. So I think how I handle it essentially is I think over many years of doing this, you learn to, again, using that word, divorce yourself from what your clients are going through. You empathize, but you don't sympathize. You don't become part of the process. You don't become part of the problem. So I remember in the beginning, I was deeply involved. In your case and in other cases. I remember once there was my client called me, her husband was being violent. I ran out of my house and took a taxi and went to her house. Years later,
but I can still see you do that.
Exactly.
When
I'm young.
Yeah, because that's you actually in some way. It's you, but. Yeah, but so the part about you saying you have to divorce, right? It's a professional self that you bring. But as a person, you're the sort.
Yeah, I want to get involved, right? So I went down to the house and all that, and I'm screaming and shouting at this guy, right? Completely unprofessional, obviously.
I totally can
but he was terrified, and he stopped. He stopped whatever he was doing, and I had to take her out of the house. But then I look back on it and I said, how ridiculous was that? I could have gotten hurt in that situation, right? And worst of all, I could have, because if I had become a witness to anything, I wouldn't have been able to act for my client either. So on many levels, it wasn't the smartest decision to make. But I was so emotionally involved in my clients' cases at that point in time. So I've learned over the years to, take a step back and not be so involved. I mean, you still feel for your clients and you give them your emotional guidance and all that, but I'm not running to anybody's houses anytime soon anymore. That's not what I'm doing. So that's how I kind of deal with it. I mean, I train my boys, my associates as well, the same way.
Right.
I call them my boys. I've got 2 associates currently under me. Yeah. So I train them the same way to, because when you start when you're younger, for some reason, you're just more like ready to go, anytime you're ready to fight for your client, especially if you feel for your client, if there's violence and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So,
which is such a natural human experience, but at the same time, as you said, you could actually do more harm.
Yes.
Right.
To their case and to yourself as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So that's I think that's an important trait to have, not just for a divorce lawyer lah. I think many a time when things get too messy, it's not a bad thing to sort of divorce
because
yourself from being part of the story, but observe what's going on.
Correct.
Right?
And you're able to give better advice as well. If you're more involved in
support,
in it, you can't give proper advice. It's kind of marred and tainted by your own emotions as well. So it is important to keep yourself separate. To your second question, how many what's my percentage of male, female?
Yeah, because just in terms of the emotional load that you may have to sort of
okay, interestingly, insofar as Singaporeans or Asians who go through the divorce process in Singapore, I would think 60% of them, 65% are women. But in terms of when it deals with foreigners who are not Singaporeans, I have more male clients than female clients. I would say that one is about maybe 55-60% male for the foreigners.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's interesting. So really, I mean, in terms of clients, it's about equal lah.
Yeah.
But in any case, like we all said, I don't think it's necessarily that for a woman, it's more difficult, right? Emotionally, I think it's always difficult.
Yes, it is. I think even if you're a man, and especially in this day and age, men are more involved in the raising of their children and all that. Right. So it is a very difficult process for them as well now. Not so much the divorce per se, but the ancillary matters that come after that, which is, custody, care, and control of the children. Right. That is usually, obviously, the money matters. That's always more usually difficult for the man to deal with as well.
That's an interesting perspective there. So I remember that, yes, you were talking about the three grounds, right, that you can actually file a divorce on. And I remember that we could file on either grounds of unreasonable behavior or adultery, but we decided to go with unreasonable conduct because, I think I remember that because at the time I still loved him and I did not want him to have a permanent record of being labeled an adulterer. I remember that. I don't remember whether I told you about it, but also you later advised me that if we go for that, in terms of adultery, then the cost would be more because we would have to prove.
Yes, correct.
Right?
I think there were various reasons. I don't remember your rationale for it. I don't remember you telling me your rationale for it. But I remember my advice being that there were two fronts. One, when it comes to adultery, you need actual evidence, right?
Like you have to hire a PI and stuff like that, right?
Yeah. Which at that point in time, you didn't have that unless you got the parties involved, right? And you didn't want to do that. And the other reason why I advise you to go on reasonable behavior was because of his personality. Certain things you had told me about him and his ego, right? I knew that if you went down this route of adultery, he was going to make it very, very difficult for you. I mean, at the end of the day, regardless of which way you went, he was still going to make it difficult for you.
Yeah, but why chose a more difficult path?
Yes,
right? Actually, now that you are saying this, I do recall you saying that. Yeah, actually. And that was really good advice, right? I mean, not that as you said lah, not that it didn't get dragged out, not that it didn't get difficult. How many counterclaims came, right? One after another. So then there were three options, right? For divorce.
Yes.
What do you think now of? That still are the three options right now, right?
There are five options. Like I said, there's three,
separate,
which and then there's two separation ones. So there are five technically.
Okay, five technically.
Yeah.
What do you think of the no-fault divorce option that has been sort of proposed?
This is it's up for some debate between lawyers as well. Some are for it, some are not. Me personally, I am for it. I am personally for it. I think that when we make decisions as adults, and if we decide that this is I don't want to be married anymore. I don't want to be with this man or this woman anymore. And I want to live my life a different way. I want to change the route of my life. We should respect that decision. We shouldn't put roadblocks in people's ways or in their path to happiness. That's what I strongly believe. So I think this is a good a good thing to have. And it also removes the acrimony between the parties. Because even if you have an amicable divorce now, you still have to go on the basis of unreasonable behavior. You still have to say certain negative things about the other person.
Oh dear,
and then you have to go through this process of talking to them and seeing whether what they would be okay with, what they wouldn't be okay
but
with.
Who really would be okay with being called unreasonable?
You'd be surprised. Because certain times if all the ancillaries are agreed, like the division of assets and all, then some people
just going through the process.
Yeah, they're who are a bit more open-minded. They're like, I don't care what the reasons are. I want out, and if everything else is fine, then it doesn't matter whatever the grounds are. Because we have to remember that at the end of the day, that piece of that paper that you get that ends your marriage just says that you have been divorced. That on the grounds of unreasonable behavior, full stop. It doesn't go into the details of the grounds.
But if one wants to, you can find out, right? Through the affidavits, no?
Who's going to show it to you? Because technically, no court is going to give you those documents.
Right.
Those are privileged. It's private documents. You're not going to see that. Unless one of the parties goes around, and it happens. It does happen.
Wow.
And one of the parties goes around showing these documents to family members, to friends, and say, see, he's admitted that he committed adultery. It does happen once in a while.
Right.
Because there's a lot of pain and anger there. People react in a certain way.
Yeah, there's vengefulness and a way of protecting themselves. So, I mean, for me, I was broken to the point of having only $16 in my bank, but not just because of the divorce.
Was I buying drinks at that point?
Yeah, probably. No, actually, I will just say that she actually bought me quite a lot of drinks during that time too.
You owe me.
Yes, I do. That's why I just gave her a copy of the book as a payback. No, but the slew, right? The slew of legal suits and losing the business along with it was actually a main reason, right? Having lost everything, you and the firm then were also very kind, right, to support me in whatever way you could. Can you dispel or confirm the myth that divorces are expensive?
Oh dear, you're asking me. Okay, if you're going to go down the contested route, divorces are very, very expensive.
I think that's important to share.
That is the reality. You go through a contested divorce trial, you're looking at costs, depending on who you hire, which lawyers you have, and how many affidavits are filed, you're looking at easily $20,000 to $50,000 just to end your marriage. That's not even dealing with the other components of it, which is then the second part, which is the division of assets, maintenance for the children, maintenance for the spouse, husband or wife, and custody, care, and control. That can easily, depending, some cases last 4 or 5 years. That can easily set you back a couple of $100,000, right? In most regular run-of-the-mill cases, you're looking at ancillaries costing you another $30,000, thereabouts, yeah?
So about 50,
So in total, you're looking at between 50 to 80,000, if it's completely contested from beginning to end, right? Because of the affidavits that you file.
Yeah.
It's not a cheap process. So it's always recommended. And in fact, to be fair, I would say 95% of all divorces, the first part, the divorce part, is usually settled. May not start at the outset, it may start contested,
right? But
before it comes to the trial, it usually gets settled. About 95% of cases. Just like yours as well,
right?
We didn't go for a trial at the end of the day. We settled the divorce at the end of the day. So similarly, this is what is currently happening.
Oh, okay. So when you said it's settled, meaning you don't bring it to trial.
Correct. So basically, you amend your pleadings and you bring it down, water it down a bit, so that it's acceptable to the other party in terms of the unreasonable behavior, and then you can go ahead without the trial process.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's important to share with the listeners. Not that we wish for anyone to have to go through the process that we both have gone through. But what do you think then are the options given just the exorbitant fees that you just shared for those who may not even have the financial resources to?
So if you don't have the financial resources, you can always approach the Legal Aid Bureau, right? They can assist you. And honestly, although this is not to my advantage to be saying, most of the documents that you need to file are available on the Family Court website. So if you can read, write English, understand basic stuff, you'll be able to handle it yourself. The filing process, it is, it will be a steep learning curve, but it can be done. I've had many parties on the other side who are in person, right? Who are doing all their own paperwork, all their own affidavits and all that. Of course, there are detriments to that because certain things you say prejudice your case, which I can use against you in court, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So those are the problems that you will face. But, in terms of filing the paperwork and all that, it's all quite easily done because the Family Court website is very helpful as to how that happens, what you need to do.
But that's not always been available, though. Is that a recent thing?
It wasn't available, I think, when you were going through a divorce, but it's been there for some time. I think for at least 10 years. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's important information. So I was saying earlier about how scary, but how scared I was, right? But I do remember that night very vividly about him lifting his arm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I mentioned that to you too,
There
actually.
are certain things that, that happen. You can forget a lot of things in your life, but there are certain moments in your life
right?
which you cannot, you will never ever forget. You can still close your eyes and see it happening.
I know. But I was just thinking about that, right? And that act of standing up to him, though, I also must say, as much as it was scary and frightening, and that's why I went into the study to record, right, into the fetal position, I also think that somehow that act of standing up kept my last bit of dignity and agency, despite me being so broken.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, now looking back, obviously, it was only because I walked out of a very toxic marriage that I can be where I am today. Because I took a long time to even decide that,
Yeah, I remember. But I actually think that your act of standing up saved you from getting hit that day. You know what I mean?
That's absolutely
I
true.
believe that to be 100% true.
Yeah.
If you hadn't stood up for yourself, you would have gotten hit.
Yeah.
Because and I tell this to a lot of my clients who are victims of abuse and all that, is you need to, that's what bullies, when it comes to dealing with bullies, if you stand up to bullies, they tend to back down.
Yeah.
Because they're cowards at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
And that's what you did. He was a bully and you stood up to him and he backed down, right?
And that also got me to think about when I was volunteering as a yoga teacher with Star Shelter, which is a shelter for, victims of family violence, right? How I could relate to the stories from so many of them, who actually, some may have been abused for years, but when they finally make that act of standing up to walk out, sometimes with, quite a number of children in tow, that actually start their process,
of healing as well.
Healing, but I think of starting to feel, a little bit better about themselves, right? Because it's so broken and it's incredible, right? So what's your experience, as a lawyer about abuse and violence as a cause?
Okay, so when it comes to violence and abuse, I think we have protections in place. You need to come to court, you need to take out a personal protection order and all that. But in my experience, those get broken all the time. People breach those orders. The problem that I see is that, one, there is not enough conversation about it. People are afraid to come forward when they're going through that abuse. And this primarily is women. Okay, and that is just the reality that there are more women that are abused than men.
That's correct.
That's not to say that men are not abused. They are.
But the statistics are definitely
correct. Right? So they have this fear of coming forward. And the other thing, I think more than anything else, it's the same emotions you were feeling during your divorce. It's the shame coming out and admitting that this is happening to me, that I have been weak. I couldn't. I've had a man hit me. I haven't been able to defend myself. And the worst situation is when those women are educated and high flyers or have great careers. It's very, very hard for them to come out and admit that this is happening to them, because it is very humiliating in their minds that I've got all the successes, but in my own home, I'm nothing more than, something that my husband beats up whenever he feels like. So I think that is a very difficult area, and we need to educate more. We need to give them more options. I know there are a lot of options, but I don't think that message is being delivered enough. We're not telling women outside that there's nothing to be ashamed about. That's not enough of that being sent across.
Why do you think that's the case? Because actually, I must say, as you are sharing about how, especially for educated women who are successful, I remember a really close friend of mine telling me about, her best friend who was actually really abused and beaten to a pulp.
Yeah.
Right? And then it would take a few days just to recover from the abuse. And even when the husband got more garang, and actually started hitting her in front of their children.
Oh dear.
Yeah, even then she was
didn't.
No. So you just reminded me that actually, we may tend to, as a society, think that, those who are abused tend to come from a certain segment of society, whether it's of a lower social class or, that there's not...
particular race as well. I get that a lot.
Yeah, exactly, right? But it's actually not true.
It is completely untrue.
Yeah.
And that's very sad, because you don't realize you never know what's going on in someone's household.
That's true.
You know, people come out, they show you that they're successful, they're doing well, they're happy, but at home, their lives can be very different. And that's what I've had to experience. Like, you know, I've had clients who've come, some were friends as well, who would come and tell me these stories, and I'll be in shock. Like, I never knew, you know, and I've known you for years. I never knew that was a possibility, because they keep it so well hidden, because they're ashamed.
Yeah, so this shame, right, thing we need to try to break through though,
Yeah.
because like you said, I mean, I would imagine that, you know, we need to have a different kind of message to these women or men, right, who are educated, who are accomplished actually, and their public identity is one that they have it together.
Correct.
And therefore it actually makes it even harder for them to come out to share.
Correct.
We need to try to, but what do you think we should do? What are some things that come up for you that we should do better with getting the
That's
message?
the difficulty I have. Like, I've spoken to many of my clients, and I've said, what can we do to get you to, you know, go make a PPO application? You know, even after all of this, they don't want to take out PPO application because they don't want, and they're like, there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do to help me. I just want a divorce. I just want out. I'm not going to get a PPO. I don't want to I know that trial process. I don't want it in my divorce papers either.
Wow.
Right? Because I don't want it to ever get out. So those are things. I think all we can do is how we raise our children, really. You know, that's what we have to do.
Yes.
Education from when they're young, that these things are not acceptable.
Yes.
No matter who you are, where you are in life, right?
Yes.
You have to stand up. Basically stand up. That's what I always say.
And actually on that note, it just got me thinking that, you know, that's why it's also important, because one of the discourses with the no-fault divorce option was that actually the impact on the children. I mean, you talked earlier about how you reduce the acrimony, but actually the acrimony is not just between the two parties.
Yes.
It's actually on the children.
Correct. The stress
right?
that the children feel during that process.
Yeah, and also as you talked about how we raise our children, how we role model, you know, what is a healthy relationship.
Correct.
It's so important for the children so that when they grow up, they understand that actually to be in a healthy relationship, this is how it looks like.
This is what
and unhealthy.
Correct.
Yeah.
You know, actually, this is the funniest thing, because Asian families get that wrong all the time, in the sense that we are always thinking we have to stay together for the sake of the children.
Oh my goodness,
we have to stay together, and regardless of the fact that we're fighting so much and all of that is going on. You know, then exactly.
Other, right?
But you have to realize you're role modeling for the kids, and when the kids grow up, this is what they see. This is a normal relationship. This is a normal marriage.
Absolutely.
I've had when I've acted for men who tell me, what's the problem? You know, when I do these things, my father used to do it. My mother had no problem, and that's what happens because you are raised in that environment.
That's correct.
So I always tell my clients as well that, you know, I appreciate that this is what you're thinking, but what is your family situation at home like? What can the children see? What do you think they're not seeing? Because, you know, a lot of people think that, we're not fighting in front of them. You don't realize your walls are pretty thin.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
And children can sense tension between parties, right? If you're not talking to each other, you're angry with each other, it's in your body language.
They're more sensitive than us because they don't have the they don't have available the vocabulary, so they feel.
Yes, exactly.
Right? So I think this is really something that's important, because I think when it comes to parenting, that's something we don't think about, right? I mean, we can tell all we tell to the children, but if we don't role model that, then that's what they will take as normalized.
Correct, because we have been raised as well, to be fair. I mean, all of us have been raised by parents who tell us that you must stay together.
Yes.
Divorce is embarrassing. You should never get a divorce. Right? I mean, because that's their generation. That's how they grew up. So we have to change the way we raise our children to make sure that the mistakes that we have made in our life are not repeated by the kids.
And that takes a lot of awareness.
And honestly, I don't think we're there yet. That's the truth. I mean, I think we have grown a lot as a society. We are more educated. Individuals, husbands, wives are more educated, and they raise their children better than they used to before. But we're still not quite there yet. It's gonna take maybe 2-3 more generations before we can.
What needs to change? What do we need to change to make sure we don't have to go through 2-3 generations? Because actually, I think the intergenerational violence and trauma, you know, doesn't necessarily just, I mean, we can kind of like cross our fingers and hope that fades off, and you know, the education, the awareness will come in, but that's leaving it to chance, right? What do you think we can do more proactively to
one of the things that I've always thought about, is the fact that, when you get married, right? It's so easy to get married, Just sign a couple of papers, sign your name here, and you're done.
Get your flowers.
To go through the divorce, it's 2-3 years of your life to get out of the marriage, right?
Yeah.
I think we need to make it a bit harder to get married. You need to go through counseling classes. You need to understand what it is like to be married. It's not this fairy tale notion of great dinners and it's going to be romantic. Unfortunately, it might be for the first 2-3 months, your honeymoon period.
She only said 2-3 months. She didn't even say 2-3 years anymore. This is how things have changed.
But the reality is that that's not your day-to-day living, right? When you have bills to pay, you have all that stress, cleaning the house, cooking to do, and all that. Cleaning up, that's the biggest one, right? And all of that.
Can tell what you don't like doing.
Yeah. The problem with Singaporeans is that because we are still an Asian society, we don't believe in living together before getting married.
Yes.
Or not that we don't believe it, or our children don't believe it. The parents would have a huge problem.
It's from a point.
Parents would have a huge problem. I think our younger generation, like my kids at their age, I don't think they would have a problem living with someone. Yeah. I may have a slight problem. Even as modern as I am, I may potentially, and I would have to actively adjust myself to say this is okay, and actually this is better for them, right?
Yeah.
But I think one of the things is living together. That's important. Getting to know each other, getting to know each of you in that home environment before taking that plunge. Because staying with someone is very, very different than dating someone.
Yes.
I remember when I first started living with my husband, the one thing he used to do was he used to read the newspaper, and then after he was done, I was telling, he would just throw it on the floor. He would be done reading each section, and then he would throw it on the floor. And I would walk out and look at it, and it would, like, my blood would boil. This kind of things. My blood would boil.
But to an outsider, that seems so trivial, right?
Yes, exactly.
But it has some, it elicits such a strong,
correct,
response
because
for different reasons, right?
Exactly. And you don't realize these things. And you don't realize these things when you're dating. It's only when you live together. That was not, I'll just make it clear, that was not the reason for our divorce.
Go find some affidavit somewhere that says unreasonable conduct. Show newspapers on the floor after reading.
But it's these small things you realize that they start eating away at you, and then slowly it becomes other issues and other issues.
Such a great point that you put out, though. Like that actually, it's something is really kind of perverse here, right? We should be making marriage, well, not necessarily more difficult than divorce, but certainly, more difficult than it is right now.
Yes.
Right? So that there is a lot more preparation that goes into it, both emotionally and not just emotionally, financially, and at so many levels, right?
Yeah. I think counseling is a good thing.
Yes.
Active marriage counseling to tell you what to expect.
Yeah.
How to deal with each other. The idea of compromise. Yeah. Very, very important in a marriage. Which, unfortunately, I think when you're very young and you get married, you don't believe in compromise.
That's right.
You don't believe
I don't think you are biologically and physiologically built to compromise.
Exactly. It's because this is my life. I want to live my life the way I want to. And you realize, and that's completely fair. And you're entitled to live your life however you want to. But when it comes to a marriage, adjustments have to be made, unfortunately, right?
But unless you are actually given some tools and skills, you wouldn't know how to deal with it.
Correct, yes.
Right?
And these are not conversations you have with your parents. Your parents are not going to sit you down and say, when you get married, this is what is going to happen, and this is how you need to deal with the situations, right? Yeah. So I think that's why, in order to get your license to get married, you have to go through this process.
I mean, some people out there might be just like going to hum-tum you for such
Of course, I don't, this is not something that a lot of people agree with.
Yeah, but I think it's a really valid suggestion. I mean, I think there's a lot of merit in it that we should consider, but that's wonderful. So, Carrie, what would you say is your biggest takeaway from this conversation? Or what came up for you that I guess that really, you were not thinking about, but it just came out in the course of this conversation?
Well, I think the one thing that stood out for me was, how we raise our children. The fact that when we're going through this difficult process in our life, we don't realize how we're role modeling for the children, what we're showing them about what a happy relationship is, what a positive relationship is. And I think that's something that I had not planned on speaking about, but it just came out naturally. And I think that's something that we really need to, focus and put our minds to, because they are the future, and we want our children to be better versions than we were. Right? We want them to be happy. We want all the best for them. So how we role model for them, how we raise them, I think it's a very important thing to always remember and have.
Yeah, very powerful. For me, though, the big thing that I really like is what you suggested, right? How we need to look at the process, the preparation or what we need to do to get into marriage. As you said, getting a divorce is so difficult, but getting married is so easy.
Yeah.
So I think that was a very powerful sort of reframe and a new perspective, right? Yeah. Of how by actually making marriage a lot more prepared, a lot more intentional, a lot more effortful, but in the right way, may help us actually reduce the divorces.
Yeah, I think
in a more healthy way.
It will save a lot more pain in the future if we go into it with our eyes wide
open. Yeah. One last thing. Do you remember the movie that we wanted to make?
You know what? I'm getting really old. I don't think I'll be able to play myself.
So just we don't know whether it's gonna make it, but I'm gonna say it anyway. So in one of those times we were drinking at Penny Black, I think, we just met a movie producer from New York, or I did, and I was sharing how this movie producer wanted to make a movie out of my story because it was just so out there. And so I was sharing with Carrie and some of her friends. Actually, we were just hanging out.
Yeah.
And then we decided to ask ourselves who would we like to play us
in the movie of our lives.
And then I was going through some options for myself, completely humble, saying that, it could be Andy McDowell, Meg Ryan. I turned to Carrie and I said, Carrie, what about you? And she's like, what? I'm going to play myself, of course. Remember that?
Of course.
I'm going to play myself. Nobody's going to play me. No, but having said that, Carrie, I really want to say that I think a big part of having gone through that darkest year of my life, I mean, it was the darkest year, but I think you really made it, so much easier. I wouldn't say that you've completely taken away the darkness,
of course,
right?
Yes.
But it made it so much easier to the point that when we finally got the divorce decree, which took a long time too, right? Because he dragged on. We actually celebrated at the top of the Streets Hotel with bottles of Moët and Chandon.
Yes, I remember.
But so actually, interestingly, that year really ended up being the most illuminating, I must say.
Yeah, I think so.
In a strange sort of way, such a turning point for me
in your life.
Yeah, very much.
I think your life changed significantly as a result of what you went through.
Yeah, big time. And
I think happy to have been there to help you and support you through that process.
No, you definitely did. I mean, right now I must say that I bear no ill towards the ex-husband. In fact, sometimes I think I'm grateful for him. Like you said, it was such a turning point for me. I'm grateful that he came to my life then to almost be a teacher, in a bad sort of way to some people, but he did teach me the biggest lesson, right?
That you can't trust. I mean, I know this is the big picture way of looking at things, but I don't know many people who would be as magnanimous as you are in that.
But it's true though. I think what has happened, like you said, right, really has made me who I am today.
Yeah,
right?
I agree
with that. Every scrap, every bruise.
Yeah.
Every crack.
You had to fight your way back.
I did. But thank you for being there for me though. This is so
happy.
Special.
I'm glad that you've come out of it better, stronger.
And I'm so happy to be able to make this now immortalized onto this podcast series. So all right, we're gonna as always share with the listeners some resources in relation to the topics we discussed in this conversation. This by no means is exhaustive, but we would be able to leave some links on our show notes and social media posts. Carrie mentioned earlier about Legal Aid Bureau. I think that's also the SCWO Legal Clinic. And obviously for those listeners out there who would like to get support for domestic violence, there's always the Star Shelter, the Kasal Rada Shelter. And we will now leave you with 2 invitations since we read 2 chapters for this episode. When did you stand up for yourself because you were all you've got? What did you learn from that? Is there a victim in you that feels damaged, yet it feels strangely comfortable? What are the benefits and costs of feeling this way?